Hello and welcome everyone. Today we're presenting a workshop on avoiding plagiarism and we're going to be talking about APA style. I'm Joy Bracewell. I'm the director of the Writing Center at Athens State, and with me here I have
Mary Aquila. I'm one of the librarians here.
Okay, great. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, today we're going to do an overview of APA, talk about what it's used for, go into the elements of an APA paper. Then we're going to talk about how you can avoid plagiarism by quoting, paraphrasing, and summarizing correctly. And then we're going to take a closer look at some references, how to format references in your references page. All right, so getting started with our overview. What is APA? All right, so APA stands for American Psychological Association. It's a citation style that's commonly used in the social sciences. Other disciplines use it as well in terms of business and nursing. And at Athens State, many other disciplines use this style on campus, such as education. So it's the most commonly used style at Athens State University. So APA, which is the shorthand version of the style by the American Psychological Association, regulates stylistics, in-text citations, and references. So where can you find more information about APA? So you're not going to be able to remember all of the things that we talk about today, and there's too many details to go over in depth when it comes to using APA to cite your sources. So the best thing to remember is where to go to look up particular instances that you'll need to be aware of. The APA has a blog that you can go to, and that is maintained by experts who use APA style. So we've got two addresses there for you with the blog and the website that APA maintains. Those are great places to go. Another place you can go is the library, and you can get the hard copy of the APA manual. The Writing Center also has a copy. I'm holding a copy right here. Now you'll have to use these in the center in the library. You won't be able to check those out, but you can use them while you're here. And Purdue OWL has a very good site that you can search for some basics that's well maintained, and you can trust the content there, and the web address is down there for you. All right, so an overview of the elements of an APA paper. So you're going to have a title page, and on a separate page you'll have an abstract. And then you've got the main body of the paper, and then you have a references section. Now, according to how your professor modifies APA, you may or may not have all of these elements, but these are the standard elements that are present in APA. So always type your papers when you turn them in, and they should be double-spaced in APA. Also make sure that your margins are set at 1 inch all around, and use a standard font. Probably 12 point is the best size, and include a running head on the top of your paper in APA. And if you need to look at an example essay, we've got a link down there for you at the Purdue OWL. You can also just Google Purdue OWL APA example essay, and you can download an example and look at all these elements in detail yourself at your leisure when you're actually writing a paper and you need to look at this. So one thing that's special about APA that not all styles have is an abstract. Now this is a really important part of your paper. So we don't have anybody joining us live today, but if you're at home watching this, go ahead and just think to yourself, what is an abstract? Okay, so if you were able to say that it's a brief summary of the research for your readers, that was a good answer, or anything along those lines. If you were able to say something along the lines that it quickly guides the reader to the content of your paper, that's also a good answer. And the elements of an abstract include an intro or overview purpose, a sentence or phrasing that touches on that in your paper, touches on your methods and your results in your discussion, if those are all present in your paper. And it should be around 150 to 200 words. All right, so let's get into how you would use research in your writing and use it correctly. So you've got two things to think about in APA style. You've got your in-text citations and you've got your references. So the in-text citations are indicated by a parenthetical citation and often a signal phrase that introduces the borrowed material. And these are going to appear in the body of your paper. For APA, you'll include author, date, and for quotations, you'll also include page numbers in those in-text citations. Now, your references, they appear at the end of the paper, and they're going to provide the full publication information for your sources. And another thing to remember is that they're alphabetized by the last name of the authors. So let's kind of refresh ourselves on what plagiarism is. It's the act of using another person's words or ideas without giving credit to that person. So there's many ways to plagiarize, so it's really important to cite carefully and correctly, and we're going to talk about that a little more. So next we have a decision chart about when to use citations. So the most broad category would be, did you produce or indent or write the information? If the answer is yes, then you don't need a citation. Now, most often that's not going to be the case because you're going to have to write research papers, and when you're reading information from different sources, that information probably did not originate with you. Even though it feels like it did because you've been reading so much. And that's where taking careful notes and keeping track of your sources makes the difference between plagiarizing and not plagiarizing. So if the answer to the question above is, did you produce, invent, or write the information? If the answer is no, then you can ask yourself, is this common knowledge? And common knowledge would be, the date when someone who's really well-known died. When was John Lennon assassinated? When was JFK assassinated? That would be common knowledge. Then you wouldn't need a citation. But most other types of knowledge is not common knowledge, and you would need a citation. And when in doubt, just go ahead and cite your source. All right, so again, at home, as you're watching this, what do you think? Is the following statement true or false about paraphrasing? So the statement is, paraphrasing correctly means changing every third word of a source. So think about that. Is that true or false? Okay, so if you said that was false, then you would be correct because that is an incorrect paraphrase and that's actually plagiarism. So let's think about the guidelines to avoid plagiarism a little more. As we stated before, common knowledge does not need to be cited, but original expressions of common knowledge should. So if you have a technical process and someone has taken the time to write that process down in detail, then you need to cite that. That's that person's expression of a detailed process, and that needs to be cited. So that's one example of that exception there. And the second point there, if you rephrase someone else's ideas in your own words, the original source should be cited. So that is what paraphrasing is. So changing every third word is not going to be a proper way to rephrase someone else's ideas. And also remember that failure to clearly indicate the beginning and the end of summarized literature may lead to charges of plagiarism. So you have to show your readers where the information you borrowed begins and where it ends. And for more information on that, Mary has created a LibGuide down there, so you may want to bookmark that page for yourself. There's lots of great resources there that you can look at to acquaint yourself with how to avoid plagiarism and also citation styles. Okay, so let's think about why we would want to integrate sources before we go forward. You want to use sources because you need to provide support for your claims. You need evidence. You need to add credibility to your writing. You also need to refer to work that leads up to the work you're doing now. So there was a conversation going on, or there was research that was happening up until the time you entered that conversation, or you wanted to look at that research, and you need to know what that is and refer to it in your work. Another reason why you want to use sources is to give examples of several points of views on a subject, or to call attention to a position that you want to agree or disagree with. All right, so thinking about quoting and what that means. So quoting is to use someone else's words verbatim. And in print, that means that you have to copy word for word, letter for letter, character for character, everything, the segment from which you're quoting. And that means if you want to quote from a passage and there is an error in that passage, you also have to include that error in your quote. So remember that. And if you have any questions on how to do that correctly and what you would do to show your readers that you understand there's an error in there, there's a special way to do that. But I recommend going to the Writing Center and making an appointment to talk more about that. So just reviewing when you would use a quotation. So when the actual words are so integral to a discussion that they can't be replaced. So something has a special phrase that has come to be known in your field, or that person, the author has come up with that phrase, and that's or a way of describing a process, and you have to quote to show that fully. And again, if something is so precisely and accurately stated that you can't paraphrase it well and have it retain its original meaning. So when you're using a quotation, make sure to provide your reader with a signal phrase. And we have a very simple one here that's a nice formula that you can use. According to Doe, and then in APA, you always put the year of publication right after the source material. So the year of publication is in parentheses, 2006, and then we have a comma, and then we would go on with our sentence. And we have another type of example down here at the bottom that starts out with the author's name. So Stenberg and Lee, and then we have the date that they published their document, agree that teacher learning is, quote, an intellectual and ongoing process, end quote. And then you have the page number in parentheses with the P dot period in front of it. And notice that the period is at the end of the parentheses, and notice that the quotation marks come before the parentheses with the page number. So all of those punctuation marks are going to be really important when it comes to writing your paper and making sure you're building up your credibility by doing things correctly. All right, so let's talk about paraphrasing sources a little bit more. So as we stated before, it's to state someone else's ideas in your own words. And this is something that's really difficult to do well. And so you probably need to get into some habits around this that will help you paraphrase correctly, such as reading the passage that you want to paraphrase or the pages you want to paraphrase, taking notes on a note card, looking that would state that passage in your own words, looking at your note card, and then looking at the passage and making sure that you're not inadvertently quoting from the passage. And if you have, go ahead and put quotes around whatever is exactly the same. And then go back and re-paraphrase if you don't want to quote at all. So basically, paraphrases take a focused segment of a source and they condense it, and they may be the same length as the source, the passage that you're using, but they're usually shorter. And again, in a paraphrase, you'll also include the author and date, and it's kind of a courtesy to your reader to include page numbers that you do not have to. In the example below, you'll see that page numbers have been included. So we have a paraphrase of a passage, and then we have the author's last names. In this case, we have two authors. One of the last names is Bram, and the other last name of the other author is Peebles. And they're combined with an ampersand. That's how APA does that. And then you have a comma, the year and the page number, the page range. And again, that is not mandatory that you put the pages there. For a paraphrase, you always have to do it for a quotation, but it is a courtesy when you're paraphrasing for your reader. All right, and summarizing sources, most people understand what this means. It's reducing information to the most essential points. So you're taking all of the detail out, and you're just getting the most superficial essential idea. So you're condensing maybe a whole book into one idea, a brief overview. So in a summary, you include the author and the date. You wouldn't have page numbers. So when you notice in our example down there, according to Jones is our signal phrase, and Jones is our author, and then we have the date of publication, which is quite a while ago, 1998, and then we have the rest of our sentence. So what did Jones say? The summary there is that APA style is a difficult citation format for first-time learners. But don't worry, you can learn it. It'll take practice, but you can definitely do it. All right, so let's take a closer look at references. So some general rules for our reference page. So list every cited source in the references. So if you have something in your in-text citation, that means it's going to appear in your reference. You're going to alphabetize your sources by the author's last name. And if you don't have an author, then you're going to cite by the title of whatever the source is, an article, for instance. If you have multiple authors, then go ahead and keep the exact order as they're listed on the source. So you may find yourself tempted to go ahead and alphabetize multiple authors of the same source. Don't do that. The reason why the authors are listed in the way that they are is that the first author is the most important author, and that author gets the most credit for that work that has been done on that text. And each subsequent author is in descending importance. So the way those authors have been listed is very intentional, and it should be kept the way it is in your reference for that source. All right, so also thinking about capitalization. There's very specific rules in APA for this. You're going to capitalize the first word in your title, and then you're going to capitalize the first word in your subtitle. And the subtitle is the smaller title that comes near the title in most books or articles. And also you can think of it as the title that comes after the colon. Also capitalize proper nouns. Another general rule to think about is to list authors by the full last name. But go ahead and only use the initials for the first and middle names. So in the example below, you see we have the author's last name is Zuckerman, and we've got a comma, and then his first name is Mortimer, but we only have an M because we are using an initial for his first name, so M period, and then the rest of our citation follows that information. Okay, so let's focus in on a book in print. So this is a very basic type of citation in your references. So the author that we have here, her name is Barbara Clipper. So we're going to invert the first and last name, and we're going to put the last name first, so Clipper, comma, and then instead of writing out Barbara, we're going to use the initial B, and put a period, and then go ahead and put the date next. So the date of publication is 2014, and then we have a period. So remember, be very careful about your punctuation in these citations and in these references. It really matters. These periods and commas really matter. Then in our title, notice that it's italicized. So this is the title of our book. And the only word that is capitalized is the first word of the title. We don't happen to have a subtitle here, so there is no subtitle. And also, we don't have any proper nouns. So those would be the only other things in that title of a book, that is, that would be capitalized. So we have publication information after that, the place of publication. Notice there's a colon there, and then the publisher and a period. So that's your basic book. All right, so looking at an ebook, things are quite similar for an ebook. You're going to italicize the title like you do a regular book. But the thing that changes is that you have a URL or a retrieved from line at the end instead of publication information. And then also notice that there's no period at the end of that. So if you have more questions about how to cite an ebook, we've given you a link down there to the APA blog that we mentioned at the beginning of our webinar. And this is a great place to go to find out about how to cite different formats. Because the rules change a little bit. If you have a Kindle and so forth, you have to include a little bit of extra information in there. And you're going to want to go there and see what those rules are. So again, as I mentioned at the beginning, there's lots of details to look up, but it's just a matter of knowing where to go to look up those details and then finding out about them and doing them correctly and then moving on. So trying to remember every single piece of information about APA is going to be very difficult. It's better to go ahead and remember how to look things up and what you might need to look up. So thinking at home again, we have an ebook here, and there's an error in this citation. So can you go ahead and think to yourself, what is the error in this reference below? Okay, so if you said that the first name needed to have initials on it, you were right. So the first name does not need to be written out. So you would have an M period and a B period instead of Michael and Bonnie. But everything else there is fine. Okay, so let's talk about the items that you will probably most often be citing, which is a scholarly journal. So again, we have two authors here. They're inverted by last name, and you have the initials instead of the full first names. You have the date of publication, and then you have the title of the article. And notice that the first letter of the first word of the article is capitalized. You have a period, and then you have the title of the journal. Now, this is something special for journal titles. You capitalize all of the main words in the journal title. So the rules of capitalization for other elements in the reference are different for journal titles. So please make sure to remember that. And so it's italicized, and then you notice you have the volume also italicized, and then the issue number right next to the volume number that is not italicized. So some very detail-oriented things going on there to remember. And then you have your page range. Okay, so this is actually the same item that we had in our previous example, except for this is located in a library database. So APA does not require you to list the database or URL or date of access for articles retrieved for databases, but putting a DOI is a very, very desirable thing to put if you have a DOI. Now, not all articles might have a DOI. Things that are published 10, 20 years ago might not have come out with a DOI, a digital object identifier yet, but if it's there, you definitely need to put it there. So the exact same citation, but you just see you have this DOI string at the end of it. Okay, so we have an article with a DOI reference listed here, and there's an error in it. So can you spot the error here? Okay, so you may need a little more time, but if you're thinking through and you went straight to this kind of odd-looking string at the end, retrieved from, and then the DOI, that's the error there. You do not need retrieved from when you list the DOI. That's incorrect. So you would not see those two elements together at the end of a citation. So another thing to think about is that you also may be wanting to cite a website. You follow some similar formatting for websites with the author's last name and the date, and then the title of the website. And here we do have a subtitle, so you notice that the where is in capitals there because it's the title of the subtitle. It's the subtitle, so it's capitalized. And we have retrieved from and the website address there. And if you want to look up electronic sources, I highly recommend that you use the APA blog or the Purdue OWL. You can reference the APA manual, but it was published quite a while ago, so it may be faster for you to find information on electronic sources such as websites and social media on the APA blog. And our next slide highlights that. So social media is becoming more and more a sort of legitimized form of communication that you want to pull information from in your research. And the blog does tell you how to cite social media. So here's a warning about automatic citation generators. They are very often wrong. So a lot of times, many of the elements look correct, but the title of the case in the title will be wrong, and other elements will be incorrect. You'll see a lot of errors that if you don't go over this yourself, if you just copy and paste this into your reference page, it's going to be incorrect, and it's not going to look good for your overall paper to have things that are incorrect in your references page. It doesn't add to your credibility. It detracts from your credibility as a writer. Okay, so let's summarize some of the things that we've talked about today. We've talked about what APA is. It's a publication style used by the American Psychological Association, and that regulates stylistics, so the types of ways you express yourself in your writing, also in-text citations and how they look, and references in your reference page. And the elements of an APA paper are important to remember. And again, this may be modified according to your assignment, but the main elements will be a title page, abstract, your main body, and your references. So we also talked about how to use research in your writing. We talked about what plagiarism is and how to avoid it by quoting, paraphrasing, and summarizing correctly. And again, if you have any questions about details about these things, because these are difficult skills to learn and to cultivate, you can always come to the Writing Center to talk about this in more detail with a consultant, a student consultant in the Writing Center. The last thing that we talked about was references in more depth. So this is not an exhaustive list of summarized points, but these are some main things to remember here. You're going to want to alphabetize your references by last name. List the authors of a particular source in the order in which they appear. Use the last name and the first initial. That's particular to APA. All authors' names are listed that way. And then you go ahead and capitalize and italicize journal names. So that's important to remember. And then use the DOI if available. All right. So this is the end of our workshop presentation, our webinar on APA style, and we hope that we've highlighted some main points for you about this style. If you have questions, you can call the Athens State Library. You can email a librarian, or you can go online, and there's a chat box there that you can ask questions about sources and also quick questions about style issues with your sources. And if you have more in-depth questions, you can make an appointment with the Writing Center. You can call us. at our number there and email us, and you can also go online and make an appointment yourself. So again, I hope you found this useful. Please contact us if you have any further questions about this style that's so important to use here at Athens State. And we hope you have a wonderful day. This is Dr. Joy Bracewell saying goodbye.